Welcome to In Studio from Simply Timeless. I'm Jay Daniels. Thank you so much for joining us. Brenda Earle Stokes is part of a rare breed of jazz musicians. You see, she's not only a talented pianist, but she's also quite the accomplished vocalist. Her latest album, The Solo Sessions, Volume 1, showcases her talent as a singing pianist. I visited with her recently in her Manhattan home to talk about the album and some of her esteemed musical mentors. To share her story, here's Brenda Earle Stokes. Let's go to Sarnia, Ontario, Canada for just a moment.
Yeah, Sarnia is a town of about 73,000 people, a city of 73,000 people, about an hour north of Detroit, on the Canadian side, right on the north side of Lake Huron. And I've recently done a YouTube video talking about it because people are always saying, Sarnia, is that like Narnia? But it's a pretty interesting place. It was a center of the petrochemical industry in Ontario for all these years. And a lot of people say it's the birthplace of the petrochemical industry in North America. Because of all the oil refineries and chemical plants. But a lot of really interesting people have come from there, including a NASA astronaut, one of the great contemporary classical composers, plus a lot of hockey players and musicians. So that's where I'm from, Sarnia.
Music started out for you at a very early age. You are these days a pianist and a vocalist, but you started out at the piano. Was this a family influence, or where did music come into your life?
So both of my parents took piano lessons when they were growing up, and my mother actually played. She went to nursing school and she played organ. The nursing schools were all affiliated with the churches, the hospitals were run by the churches. So she used to play organ while she was in nursing school as well. So both of my parents were musical, and it was sort of assumed that my brother and I would take piano lessons because that's kind of what middle class people did in our area. And so I started classical piano lessons when I was 4, and took weekly lessons in that all the way through until high school, when I started to feel kind of separated from what I was doing because I kind of hated the discipline of classical playing. And I knew that there was something that I was looking for. But then my high school band director played a recording of Oscar Peterson playing C-Jam Blues, the very famous recording. And it was like all of a sudden my life started at that moment, because I went, this is the thing that I wanted to do.
Oscar Peterson is, of course, very important to many Canadians. Some people forget that he is not a native of the United States, but rather of Montreal, Quebec. And so you had that in common. And certainly Oscar Peterson was a wonderful influence for you, as he has been for many others. So kind of tell us how, from hearing that first recording of Oscar Peterson doing C-Jam Blues from Duke Ellington, where did that lead you through your school years? How did that help to form in your mind what you wanted to do with this gift called music?
Well, what I found appealing with it was that it was refined, but that it was alive. It felt alive to me in a way that at that time classical music didn't affect me in that kind of way. I've since developed a different relationship with classical music, but the fact that he was improvising, the fact that there was humor in it, the fact that there was life in it, that there was virtuosity in it, the fact that you could feel his personality in it, and it felt like all of a sudden I could hear the language that I was meaning to speak. And so at that point I was playing clarinet in the jazz band, but they wouldn't let us continue for the music festivals because it wasn't part of the orchestration. So I asked if I could audition against the person who was playing piano, and the girl who was playing piano at the time saw how important it was to me and said, this clearly means more to you than it does to me. So she ducked out and let me play. And I started taking piano lessons from my high school band director, Al Weiss, who is a saxophone player. And he said in the first lesson, he says, why don't you write down what you want to learn? And I wrote down on a piece of paper, I want to learn about comping and improvising and all of the other things about jazz that I don't know yet. And I still have that piece of paper, which is pretty funny. Yeah. And he taught me everything that he knew about the piano because he had taken several semesters of class piano. And then at some point he said, okay, I've got a friend in London, Ontario, which is about an hour away from Sarnia. You've learned everything that I know about the piano. Now it's time for you to study with him. And after a little while of studying with him, I started studying with Mark Eisenman in Toronto, who's an amazing, wonderful bebop piano player. And started going to jazz camp in the summer and started my own jazz quartet. In high school, we rehearsed at 7 o'clock in the morning twice a week. And, you know, that was sort of how it all started for me.
This music has been something that you took very seriously. Did you ever have any other ideas as far as a vocation, as far as a profession, or was it always music that was at the forefront for you?
Well, if you'd asked me in grade 9 what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a writer. And it's funny because very recently, the last few years, I have been doing a lot more writing. I've written courses, I've written talks. I have a blog that I've written quite a lot on. So that was always what I imagined my life would be. Even though it was funny, I was doing music all day, every day. It was like everything in my life. But at some point when I was about 16 and I was in grade 11 was when I said, no, I'm going to do music. But definitely writing is something that is really important to me. And subsequently education has become really important as well.
When you were continuing with your education, when you were getting ready to go into adulthood, a professional life, how did you envision music playing a part? You knew that you wanted music to be at the center of your life. Did you know, though, what form that would take?
Well, once I discovered jazz, that was it. I was going to do jazz. And our education system in Canada is different than it is here. You're allowed to, I'm not sure if this is the same now, but back then it was, you were only allowed to apply for 3 universities in province. And so you don't apply to 10 or 15 schools like they do now. And so I applied for 2 schools in Ontario, and I applied to 1 school in Quebec, to McGill University. And for all of them, I wanted to be in the jazz program. And it just so happened I didn't get into McGill or the University of Toronto. So I ended up at York University, which was the best possible place. And Oscar Peterson was the chancellor of the school when I was there. So I got to know him, actually, which was kind of amazing.
And knowing him, and a lot of people have talked about, in fact, you just mentioned it, his personality was so evident within his music. In fact, his music mimicked who he was, a very cheery and bubbly person. People often said that his music had a sort of bounce. What were, through your relationship with him, and I would assume this is at the latter part of his life then, what were some of the lessons, both musically and personally, I suppose, that you were able to glean from your time with him?
Well, I didn't spend a ton of one-on-one time with him, but he would come and give frequent, like a couple of times a year, he would give lectures, or he would spend time with us, and he would play, you know, all these recordings that he was on. You know, he was playing Lester Young with the Oscar Peterson Trio and playing recordings of himself playing with Billie Holiday. And there was so much to just be touching jazz history like that, to be having that kind of relationship with it. And because I knew his music so much, it was almost like putting a face on what I already felt I knew about him. But the most significant time I ever knew him was he was working with the singers in our program, and I was in the rhythm section. I was playing piano. I wasn't singing at all in my life at that point yet. And my brother was playing bass, and a drummer was with us. And he listened to me. I was playing tenderly in the key of A flat. And he listened to me and he said, you know, the chords need to move more. And he got out of he was in his wheelchair then, he'd already has his stroke, and he walked over and sat down at the piano bench next to me on the same piano bench and said, let me show you what I mean. And he played the piece with the singer, and he says to me, you really have to think about the piano as an orchestra, that there's movement, that there's parts that are moving inside. And it took me a really long time to really fathom what he meant or how I would even do that. But it was something that I still think about pretty much every day I play.
You're listening to In Studio from Simply Timeless with our guest, pianist and vocalist Brenda Earle Stokes. Certainly many people do know you now for your singing abilities. When did you start to supplement your piano skills with your vocal talents? Was there a specific moment when that took place?
So I was, when I was at York University in Toronto, I volunteered as the jazz librarian. They had a jazz transcription library, and it took place in this, it was like a walk-in closet. And I had a record player in there with all these great albums. And I would go in there literally into the closet and sing. And I was like, I always joke, I was a closeted singer. I was in the closet as a singer. And I would say, I would go in there and I would sing along, especially with Carmen McRae. They had a whole bunch of Carmen McRae records, and I would sing and sing and sing and sing. And one night, after hours, very late, I was there and I was singing and singing and singing. And all of a sudden there was a knock at the door. And I opened the door, and it was a saxophone player in the program looking at me going, "Who is singing in there?" And I'm like, "Nobody was singing in here." "Who was singing? Are you singing? Who's in here?" And it was a very strange moment. But I wasn't ready to, quote unquote, come out of the closet. And the summer after I graduated, it was August of 1998, I went to the Banff Centre for Fine Arts, which is in the mountains in Canada, for the jazz workshop. And while I was there, somebody else heard me sing, and they said, "This is a place where you can try this out." And so I sang one song with our trio, and I got such a response from people who said that they liked hearing me sing, but that it seemed like it was a big piece of me that I wasn't sharing. And so that's kind of when it started for me, was that.
Did you sing as a solo vocalist with accompaniment, or were you accompanying yourself at this point?
I think that very first time it was a trio with myself playing piano and a bass player and a saxophone player. And what I did is I stepped away from the piano and just sang that first time. But shortly after that, I did all of my singing at the piano.
What were your initial lessons that you felt you had to learn? What were the things that you wanted to come together? And thinking about the piano as an orchestra, having that orchestral accompaniment behind yourself, when you sat down and said, "Okay, this is something that I need to work at," what were some of the things that you felt were important to developing that sound between being a pianist and a vocalist?
For the first couple of years, I just was trying to figure out how to sing, because I had sung in choirs and stuff when I was in elementary school and high school, but I really didn't know how to sing. And so a lot of my singing really rested on my piano playing and what I knew about music. So I sort of came into singing in a very backwards way. I immediately started taking lessons with a singer in Toronto called Shannon Gunn, who taught me technically how to sing, because I was trying to mimic Carmen McRae. And as she pointed out very quickly, Carmen McRae and I physically didn't have a lot in common. I was 20 years old. I'm like of much smaller stature. I have a smaller voice than her. I mean, her voice was massive. And so that was a lot of what I had to do at first. Eventually, what I had to figure out how to do was, how do I set the piano in motion, and set my voice in motion, and have those two things be somewhat independent, because keeping them related to each other is easier than separating them and thinking of them as two separate components. So I worked on a cruise ship doing sing-along piano bar for several years after that. And that was, I think, really where I figured out how to do those things independently. And
there are so many who either play an instrument or they sing, but very few who do both. Were there any specific performers who were singing pianists that you took inspiration from?
I love Shirley Horn. She was somebody who I definitely loved. I also love Nina Simone, was another person. But I think for both of them, I don't think I necessarily drew a deliberate influence. I think I was always more interested in pianists and singers and how they work together. So I was really influenced a lot by Tommy Flanagan and Ella Fitzgerald's relationship, Bill Evans and Tony Bennett,
yes.
And Oscar Peterson and Sarah Vaughan and all the other singers that he worked with, and Fred Hirsch and all the singers he's worked with. So I don't know if I was ever trying to be influenced by singer-pianists. I was really thinking about pianists and singers and wanting to somehow recreate that.
When you think about your work as a soloist, and you've done quartet albums, you've worked with ensembles before, you still do. What are the ingredients that you look to include within your own performances? Like, what do you bring to the table?
If I'm writing original music, so I do a wide range of stuff. And so when I'm writing original music, I'm trying to find a way to either bring something that is harmonically interesting or harmonically inspired. I'm looking for a lyric that's honest, you know, trying to bring that to life in some way, something that makes sense for my instrument, my singing instrument, and makes sense for what I hear on the piano. When I do a lot of arrangements of existing material, and I'm always looking for material that has a deeper meaning than what's on the page, a way that I can kind of express different experiences that I might have. And I'm always trying to find a way to challenge myself vocally so that I'm using my entire vocal instrument, and also in ways that I can have a conduit for improvising.
You have your original works, but there are also the covers that you mentioned, the ones that there's something deeper than what's just on the page. I want to dig into that a little bit if I can. What are give me some examples of songs and composers that you feel really help speak to you as a person and help dig a bit deeper into the soul?
Well, lately, I mean, because I've done so much very random stuff, but lately I would say, especially I'm working on doing a trio record later this year, a lot of the material that I've been drawing from more recently has been from the music theater arena. Because I've been working as a voice teacher and a vocal coach, I've worked with a lot of music theater people, a lot of Broadway people. And it's introduced me to a whole set of material I had never even heard of before. Songs by Andrew Lippa, songs by Cy Coleman, who again you don't hear a lot of that in jazz, Sondheim. So what I've kind of found in some of that material is it's been very exciting to get into a kind of storytelling that is a little bit different than what you hear in jazz, even though Great American Songbook is music theater. I'm sort of looking at contemporary music theater. Yes. How do those stories get told? Some of the inspiration for the harmony comes from a more wider source. It has a pop influence. It has, there's something about music theater harmony that is very unique. And so I would say those are some of the things that I've been looking for, a way to tell a story in a different way. And
you certainly look for ways to connect with other people through this music. And you hope that when they listen to your music that they gain something a little bit deeper than, oh, that sounds nice.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you approach arranging a song, when you approach recording a song, are there certain things that you look for within those works that you want to be able to speak to the listener?
Usually the songs speak to me in a funny way. I've also, some of the other material I've been drawing from lately is some pop stuff that seems to be coming from the 1980s, which is funny, it's just sort of. There's a lot of that lately from people. Yeah, it's something, and it's something I've been interested in. But I feel like a lot of times I choose material. It's not like I'm necessarily saying, oh, I'm looking for material, but something will really catch me, and it's almost like the muse taps me and says, "This is for you." I find it's almost in a similar way as when I'm composing. I get an idea for something, and the idea kind of fleshes itself out, and I sometimes wonder how much of the process I actually am in, because it feels like the muse is working, or the spirit is working, or there's something that's kind of happening, and my job is just to sit there until it's finished. So a lot of times these songs will kind of show up for me, and they'll say something to me like, there's something here for you. And the arrangements usually show up on their own too. It's not very often that I sit down and say, today I'm going to arrange such and such. Today I'm going to make this song into this. And anybody who's ever played in my band will tell you that they usually go through 7 or 8 versions of the song as it goes on. So a couple of these songs we've been playing for a couple of years, and they're like, which version of it are we doing? Because I've rearranged it 7 or 8 times. with little touches here and there. So I think that's my process.
Education, as we mentioned, is an important part of what you do professionally. We've talked about sharing this music with listeners, with other artists, sharing it together as an ensemble, but you do a lot of private lessons for instrumentalists, for vocalists. Why do you feel that education, music education in this structured setting, why is that important to helping others develop their craft? I mean, why do you feel that that's something that you should do, that's part of your own calling?
Coming from a relatively small city and not having access to, really excellent education all the time, I think I found myself, especially in my earlier years, in my teens and in my early 20s, wanting answers and not being able to get the answers that I wanted. Like I wanted somebody to have kind of a structure to give me so that I could learn all those things. And I felt like I had to run around asking a lot of questions, and then I had to get the answers myself. And so I think part of what has been really inspiring and enjoyable for me about teaching has been to come up with systems that work so that I can administer the necessary information to people in a timely fashion, in a structured way, so that they're kind of building their knowledge set. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've had so many students, and people have generally liked studying with me, because I really give people a structure. And so if someone comes in and says, I want to learn, I want to get better at such and such. I have a student who wants to be a jazz pianist, or somebody who's a pop singer who wants to accompany themselves on piano, or a music theater singer who wants to be able to belt. I have structures in place and protocols for how to get people to do all those things. And for me, that's been very exciting to be able to think in a structural way about learning, and to be able to be creative of how do I give this information to people.
There are some other things that I would consider, I guess, intangible, and you mentioned them, like your inspiration for arranging, the inspiration for writing. Those are things that I don't suppose that you can easily just say, well, here's how you do this.
Oh, I can.
Oh, so explain that for me. Like, how do you impart those things that are not the most tangible then?
Well, with me, I consider myself more of a nurture than a nature. There's people who are just innately musical and are innately gifted. I don't necessarily think of myself as one of those people. I think I was the hardworking one, because when I went into my first year of university, I was in the bottom ensemble. I got rejected from my first two choices. I was somebody you could tell I was passionate about it, but I wasn't necessarily skilled. So the tangible things for me are a very real thing. So when I have people come in and say, I want to work on my songwriting, well, I don't know if you can really teach songwriting, but you sure as heck can learn 20 Billy Joel songs and learn Elton John and become fluent in Kate Bush and become fluent in Tori Amos, and when I say to people, when people are like, wow, you write great songs, or you're able to do all this stuff, like, what a gift. And it's like, well, I schlepped it out year after year after year, playing all these songs. And at some point, when you immerse yourself in the musical language, those things start to become yours. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So whenever people come in and there's things that they want to develop, these intangible things. Like I can't teach somebody how to arrange like me, or for people to sit down and write songs in the same way as me. But if people say, how did you learn to do that? It's like, well, I can play a couple of thousand songs singing and playing at the piano. I have a huge breadth of knowledge of material from classical music, choral music, because I was a choral conductor for a few years, all kinds of jazz history that I know and can play, stride piano, the blues, Caribbean music, Brazilian music. At some point, you just try to become as knowledgeable as you can. You try to become as fluent as you can. It's like building a vocabulary if you're a poet or a writer. What do writers do to become better at writers? Well, they read, right? And so if you can make that a part of your life, then that's how you do it. And we can study what people do. You can study what Bill Evans did, and all of that will eventually rub off on you and come out.
On a personal level, I would ask, why do you do what you do? Why is this your life? Why not something else?
I have no idea. I really don't know. It doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. When you sit and look at it, you know, I was the only girl in high school that had pictures of Bud Powell in my bedroom. I mean, that's you know, like I always joke when I played Bean and the Boys, which is a bebop head that Bud Powell played a lot, and you know, I'd say, like, because what 20-year-old girl doesn't obsess about Bud Powell? I mean, it's sort of a strange thing to think, what is this person from southwestern Ontario doing in this music? I really don't know. It's been something that has made complete sense to me all along. Even though the lifestyle is insane and the financial prospects of it aren't always, it's not always a smart move, but it's something that has been at the root of the core of who I am and what means something to me. And I've had a lot of different musical forays in my life, from like choral conducting to teaching to you know, all kinds of different educational things and that I've been interested in, but it just seems like I've allowed my life to evolve the way that it has. And there's times where I felt an instinct moving me in one direction or another. And I've just tried to follow it as much as I can.
Our guest is Brenda Earle Stokes, and your latest album is The Solo Sessions, Volume 1, which, as I promoted it, and I hope I was right in saying this, when someone says Volume 1, you assume there's a Volume 2 at some point coming. And this is an album, and it is simply you doing your thing at the piano. It was recorded in a 4-hour recording session. And just when this has come out, and just a few months ago, you're already looking ahead at the next couple of projects. So tell me, where are we going from here?
I did another residency at the Banff Center, which I mentioned earlier in the interview. I went back there in November. And I had a 10-day residency there to start working on a new project, and it's called the Motherhood Project. And my son is turning 8 tomorrow, so I've been at this motherhood thing for a while. And since I was pregnant with him, I've been writing down lyric ideas. I've been singing ideas into my phone. And while I was there, I wrote 8 songs about on this project, and then I've got 2 more finished and 2 more to come, and it's a project all about the experience of mothering, from the growth parts of it, the struggle, the joy, the humor, and a lot of, you know, what is it really like? What's the real story for a mother? So that's the project I'm working on right now.
Mm-hmm. There are several ways that people can find out more information about you, not only your upcoming appearances, but also information on your albums previously released. But there are also some tools that you have, piano skills for singers. Mm-hmm. Direct people to where they might be able to find this, because there may be someone who might want to improve their skills. Where can they find out more about you?
I have 2 websites. My artistic life lives at brendaearle.com, and Earle with an E at the end. And my teaching life lives at pianoandvoicewithbrenda.com. And as you mentioned, I have this course called Piano Skills for Singers. It's actually 3 courses now under the umbrella of this. And this grew out of all my years of teaching singers how to play piano, because since piano was my first instrument, a lot of my singer friends felt really comfortable coming to study with me, and I've had a lot of people really become very successful at the piano. And so I wanted to make this available to the world at large. So I have these online courses called Piano Skills for Singers, and it's teaching singers, or really anybody who wants to learn piano, but lean towards singers so that they can learn to play.
Brenda Earle Stokes, our in-studio guest this week from Simply Timeless. Take a moment to visit her website, Brenda Earle, EARLE.com. There you'll find more information on her album and tour schedule, along with educational tools for pianist and vocalist. Until we meet again, I'm Jay Daniels. Thank you so much for joining us in studio.